He made me kneel in front of everyone at the midnight ball. But tonight, I'll make him beg for mercy in the shadows. My name is Alara, and this is how I turned my deepest humiliation into unbreakable power. It all started in the fog-shrouded halls of Blackthorn Manor, where the elite of the night gathered under crystal chandeliers that flickered like dying stars, casting long, dancing shadows across polished marble floors. I was just a mortal woman then, a quiet librarian from a small, unassuming New England town, dreaming of adventure beyond my dusty bookshelves and the predictable rhythm of daily life. The most exciting thing in my world was deciphering forgotten texts or losing myself in tales of ancient magic. Little did I know that a single, exquisitely engraved invitation, sealed with black wax and promising a masquerade of eternal secrets, would shatter my life into a million fragments, only to meticulously rebuild it in blood and shadow. It was an invitation to a world I didn't understand, a realm where immortality was a birthright and power flowed like wine. I remember the night vividly, as if the moon itself etched every cruel detail into my very soul. I was 28, and a profound sense of yearning had settled deep within me. I craved something more, something grander than the quiet hum of my library. When that elegant card arrived, it felt like a whisper from another dimension. I initially thought it was a prank, a cruel joke played by one of my mischievous colleagues. But the quality of the parchment, the intricate, almost archaic script, and the distinct, earthy scent of ancient wax dispelled that notion. Curiosity, that relentless muse, began to gnaw at me. It painted vivid pictures in my mind, clandestine gatherings, whispered secrets, forbidden knowledge. I drove through the winding, mist-shrouded forests, the towering, skeletal trees casting long, ghostly fingers across the winding asphalt. Each mile took me further from the familiar, pushing me deeper into an unknown that promised either enchantment or despair. Blackthorn Manor finally appeared through the veil of fog, a Gothic estate that loomed like a forgotten dream, its spires clawing at the bruised, purpling sky. Gargoyles watched from ledges with stone eyes that seemed to follow my every move, and the air grew thick with a sense of ancient history. The air inside was heavy, an intoxicating blend of exotic perfumes, damp earth, and something metallic, almost like old, cold coins. It clung to the velvet drapes and seeped into the very stone. Guests, adorned in elaborate gowns that shimmered like captured starlight and tuxedos as dark as midnight, moved with an unsettling grace. They whispered in hushed tones. Their eyes, even behind their ornate masks, gleamed with an unnatural intensity, reflecting the flickering candlelight like distant stars. I felt profoundly out of place, a fragile bloom in a garden of ancient, predatory flora. My simple red dress, a desperate attempt to feel festive, seemed to scream my mortality, my utter lack of belonging. I clung to a glass of crimson wine, its chill a stark contrast to the sudden heat in my cheeks, feeling like an interloper in a secret, ageless society. And then he appeared, Lord Damien Voss. He moved through the throng with an effortless authority that commanded attention without uttering a word. His features were sharply chiseled, almost too perfect to be entirely human, framed by raven hair that seemed to absorb the light. His eyes, dark as polished obsidian, held an ancient, knowing glint. And his smile, it was a masterpiece of charm, a predator's lure, capable of melting steel and disarming any shred of caution. He approached me, his gaze lingering, making me feel as though I was the only person in that vast, crowded hall. He singled me out, drawing me into conversations that swirled around ancient lore, forgotten civilizations, and the hidden desires that pulsed beneath the veneer of human existence. He spoke with a quiet intensity, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through me, making me feel seen, truly seen, for the very first time. He made me believe, for a fleeting, intoxicating moment, that I belonged. He held my hand as we danced, a slow, hypnotic waltz, and his touch was both ice and fire, sending shivers down my spine that I desperately tried to rationalize as excitement, not dread. But as the ancestral clock in the grand hall began its resonant chimes, announcing the stroke of midnight, the masks came off, literally and figuratively. The exquisite veneer of charm and hospitality shattered, revealing a truth far darker and more terrifying than any Gothic novel could describe. Damien, his mask now discarded, allowed his true nature to emerge. His eyes glowed with an internal, predatory light, and the subtle shift in his aura sent a cold dread spiraling through me. He was a vampire, centuries old, not just a host, but a ruler, surrounded by his coven, beings whose smiles now held a chilling, knowing quality. The ball, I realized with a sickening lurch, was no ordinary party. It was a ritual, a macabre selection, held for their amusement and to select a new pet from the unsuspecting mortal guests. And to my horror, his dark, unwavering gaze settled on me. "Look at her," he commanded, his voice suddenly sharp, devoid of its earlier warmth, echoing through the now silent hall like a death knell. He pointed a long, elegant finger at me, his eyes gleaming with a cruel amusement. Our little human guest, so naive, so utterly fragile. He strode towards me, his presence suffocating, and with a gesture both dismissive and powerful, he commanded, "Kneel." My legs, suddenly heavy as lead, buckled beneath me. The velvet floor felt cold against my knees, and the humiliation seared through me, hotter than any flame. He circled me, his laughter, and the echoing, mocking laughter of his coven, like shards of glass piercing my heart, each sound a fresh wound. "A fragile human," he sneered again, his voice dripping with contempt. "Thinking she belongs among gods. Thinking her pretty little dreams hold any weight in our eternal world." The crowd jeered, a cacophony of cruel whispers and sharp, predatory smiles. My tears flowed freely, hot trails down my cheeks, blurring the faces of my tormentors. I knelt, completely exposed, utterly broken, humiliated beyond any words I possessed. Why me? What had I done to deserve this public shaming, this brutal dismantling of my dignity? Every eye in the room felt like a burning coal, searing into my very being. I don't remember the exact moment I managed to scramble to my feet, but I recall the desperate scramble, the burning shame propelling me forward. I fled into the night, the freezing wind whipping my hair, mirroring the tempest raging inside me. My spirit was not just broken, it was obliterated. I vowed, with every fiber of my being, never to return, never to endure such degradation again. But the humiliation, rather than fading, festered like a gangrenous wound, turning slowly, irrevocably, into a burning, all-consuming rage. Days blurred into weeks, and I couldn't shake the memory. It haunted my waking hours and invaded my dreams, turning them into nightmares where Damien's mocking laughter was the soundtrack to my torment. Sleep offered no escape, only a replay of my abasement. I researched obsessively, driven by a desperate need for understanding, for a way to fight back. I devoured ancient tomes on vampiric lore, dusty manuscripts detailing forgotten legends of those who dared to defy the immortal. I spent hours in the hushed, forgotten corners of my own library, unearthing texts that spoke of ancient pacts, of mortal sacrifices, of hidden sources of power. I learned of the delicate balance between the human and the supernatural, of energies that could be harnessed, of the very fabric of existence that could be bent, if one dared. That's when I discovered the Whispering Well, a legend whispered in the oldest texts. An ancient site hidden deep within the manor's sprawling, overgrown grounds. It was said to grant immense power to the worthy, but always, always, at a terrible price. The texts were cryptic, hinting at a transformation, a sacrifice of one's deepest fear in exchange for something far greater than mere strength. The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. It was a slim thread of hope, but I clung to it with the desperation of a drowning woman, haunted by the incessant nightmares of that night, and fueled by a cold, unwavering resolve. I returned to Blackthorn Manor under the cover of a full moon. The air was heavy with an unnatural stillness, and the very trees seemed to hold their breath. The manor itself, its windows glowing like malevolent eyes, was alive with another gathering, another symphony of dark revelry. But this time, I was prepared. I knew the secret passages, the overlooked service entrances, details I'd meticulously gleaned from old architectural plans of the estate in forgotten library archives. I slipped past the unsuspecting guards, my heart pounding like a war drum against my ribs, each beat a defiant rhythm against my fear. I wasn't just a timid librarian anymore. I was a hunter, a ghost returning to reclaim her past. The well was nestled deep within the forgotten, overgrown garden, a place where wild roses clawed at ancient statues and ivy choked crumbling fountains. Its stone edges, smoothed by centuries of forgotten hands, were carved with runes that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow, almost imperceptible to a mortal eye, but clear to my newly awakened senses. As I peered into its obsidian depths, a cold, ancient voice echoed not in my ears, but directly in the cavern of my mind, bypassing all my defenses. "What do you offer, child of light, who dares to seek the shadows?" I whispered my humiliation, my voice raw with the pain of it, the forced kneel, the cruel laughter, the brutal shattering of my pride. Every detail, every searing moment, poured out of me like a confession. In return, the well offered power, a transformation beyond mortal comprehension. But it warned of the terrible cost, an eternal thirst, a bond to the night, a severance from the warm embrace of the sun. Desperation, a burning, absolute desperation, overrode any lingering fear. I accepted. Without a second thought, I plunged my hands into the inky blackness of the well. A surge of icy fire coursed through me, a primal, searing cold that consumed every cell, every nerve ending. My veins felt as though they were transforming into rivers of shadow, liquid darkness flowing where blood once ran. My very bones seemed to hum with a new, ancient energy. It was agony and ecstasy, a complete, violent metamorphosis. I screamed, but no sound escaped my throat, only a silent, internal rending of my former self. When I finally emerged, gasping, shivering, I was changed. I wasn't fully vampire, not in the traditional sense, but something hybrid, something more. My senses were heightened to an almost unbearable degree. I could hear the rustle of a mouse in the distant walls, smell the faint scent of fear from the manor, and the thirst, an immediate, deep-seated hunger, not for food, but for something else, something vital and potent. My eyes, I knew, were no longer the soft brown of my former self. They burned with a new, crimson intensity. I was still Alara, but irrevocably altered, forged in the crucible of my humiliation, with a thirst for justice that transcended any mere physical craving. Damien sensed my return, not through conventional means, but through the subtle shift in the manor's energy, a disturbance in the ancient currents that flowed beneath its stones. He cornered me in the manor's vast, echoing library, a place where even the dust motes danced with ancient secrets. His eyes, at first, widened in genuine surprise, a flicker of something almost akin to shock. "Alara?" he questioned, his voice a low growl of disbelief. "You dare come back after your little embarrassment, after I showed you your place." He tried to command me again, the familiar hypnotic pull of his ancient power reaching out. But this time, my will, fortified by the well's pact, resisted. The humiliation, the burning shame, no longer crushed me. Instead, It fueled me, turning his words, his attempts at mental subjugation, into a potent source of my growing strength. His power now felt blunted, less absolute. We circled each other like two predators, him mocking my pathetic attempt at rebellion, his lip curling in a sneer that no longer held its sting. "You're a foolish mortal playing at gods," he scoffed. I remained silent, my gaze unwavering, my mind silently plotting, calculating every movement, every word. I observed him, truly observed him, for the first time without the veil of fear. He, in his arrogance, began to reveal his secrets, perhaps intending to further demoralize me. He spoke of his past, of a lost love from centuries ago, a mortal woman he had cherished, then betrayed, then ultimately destroyed through his own selfish acts. His humiliation of me, he confessed, was a twisted echo, a macabre reenactment of his own guilt, his inability to control his destructive nature. But his confession, instead of breaking me, only deepened my resolve. It showed me a chink in his seemingly impenetrable armor, a vulnerability beneath the ancient, cruel facade. I noticed a subtle detail then, one that had escaped me before. A tarnished, almost black amulet, hidden beneath the collar of his fine silk shirt, yet still visible when he moved. It pulsed faintly, a dark, barely perceptible energy emanating from it. The conflict escalated, subtly at first, then with increasing tension, at the next grand ball. Damien, perhaps as a final attempt to assert his dominance or to mock me further, paraded me as his conquest. He forced me into dances where his coven members, sensing his intent, whispered cruelties in my ear, their eyes full of predatory amusement. "Still playing the human doll? Alara," one sneered. "Does your neck still ache from kneeling?" Another purred. I played along, feigning submission, allowing a carefully constructed vulnerability to show. My lips curved into a demure smile, my eyes lowered, but beneath that placid exterior, the well's power pulsed and grew within me, strengthening with each slight, each whispered insult. I used my heightened senses, my new, sharpened awareness, to observe, to listen, to gather intel. I saw the dynamics of his coven, the jealousies, the grudges, the subtle power plays. I watched Damien, his movements, his habits, the way he unconsciously touched the hidden amulet when stressed or complacent. My research into ancient vampiric artifacts suddenly clicked into place. The cursed amulet. It was a relic of immense power, not just a trinket. I learned its true purpose. It was a binding talisman, not just for protection, but for sustenance. It didn't grant Damien immortality, but it channeled ambient dark energy, allowing him to maintain his absolute power, to project his hypnotic commands, to sustain his centuries of existence without true effort. If shattered, it wouldn't kill him, but it would sever his primary connection to that easy power. It would force him to confront his true, raw form, his inherent vulnerabilities, to struggle for existence. The curiosity burned hotter than any thirst. Could I really turn the tables so completely? Could I truly strip him of the very source of his comfortable tyranny? The whispers of the whispering well, a part of my very being now, affirmed it. The amulet was the key, the turning point, the decisive moment where the scales of power irrevocably tipped, came in the manor's crypt. It was a place cold and silent, thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten history, its walls lined with ancient sarcophagi. I lured him there under the pretense of absolute surrender. My voice, carefully modulated to convey a fragile despair, trembled just enough as I whispered, "You've won, Damien. I admit defeat. I can't fight you. I can't fight this power." I painted a convincing picture of a broken woman, driven to her knees once more, seeking only an end to her torment. He, bloated with his own arrogance and certainty of victory, fell for it. He sauntered into the crypt, his every movement radiating smug satisfaction, utterly unguarded. So, the little human finally understands, he purred, his eyes gleaming with anticipated triumph. Good. Perhaps now you'll be a more compliant pet. But as he approached, his hands reaching out to grasp my chin, to force my gaze up to his, I struck. The crypt, with its echoing acoustics, amplified the sudden rush of air as I moved with a speed that defied mortal comprehension, a swiftness granted by the well's power. My hand shot out, not in aggression, but in a precise, calculated strike, snatching the dark amulet from its hiding place beneath his collar. It was cold, strangely heavy, and pulsed with a faint, malevolent energy in my grasp. His eyes, usually so composed, widened in genuine shock, then narrowed into slits of pure, incandescent rage. He lunged, a blur of motion, fangs bared, a guttural snarl ripping from his throat. But the well's pact, the ancient energy now coursing through my veins, had made me his equal, if not his superior, in raw speed and strength. I evaded his attack, sidestepping with a grace I never knew I possessed. We fought, not with physical blows, not with fangs and claws, though the air crackled with a palpable, primal tension. We fought with words and wills, with the clash of ancient power against newly awakened strength. He hurled insults, his voice laced with venom, about my fleeting mortality, my pathetic human emotions, my insignificance in the grand tapestry of eternal existence. You are nothing, Alara, a momentary flicker, a blip in time. I have seen empires rise and fall while you were but dust, he roared, his voice shaking the very crypt. But I countered, my voice steady, imbued with the quiet power of conviction, with truths about his lonely, loveless eternity, his inability to truly connect, his endless cycle of betrayal. You are a slave to your own vanity, Damien, I retorted, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. Your eternity is a gilded cage, and your power, a hollow echo of true strength. In that moment, the reviravolta, the profound turning point, hit me with an electrifying clarity. I realized my power wasn't just physical strength, wasn't just heightened senses, or the ability to move with impossible speed. My true power was emotional. It was the ability to face my humiliation, to transmute that pain into unwavering resolve, to understand the depths of his own internal void, a strength he utterly lacked. I held the amulet tightly, feeling its dark hum against my palm. With a guttural cry, fueled by every moment of suffering he had inflicted, I brought it down against the sharp edge of a broken sarcophagus. The amulet shattered with a sound like crystal exploding, releasing a wave of shadows, a cacophony of ancient whispers that lashed out, not physically, but spiritually. It bound him, not with chains, but with an invisible force, forcing him to relive his own betrayals, his own cruelties, his own lonely heart. He crumpled, his immortal facade cracking, tears of blood streaking his face as visions of his past victims, his lost loves, his broken promises, haunted him. He was no longer the arrogant, all-powerful lord, but a creature writhing in his own torment, a mirror of my past suffering. The tables had turned completely. I was no longer the kneeling girl, broken and shamed. I was the one holding the reins, the architect of his profound, emotional undoing. With Damien weakened, his true power temporarily severed from its source, I orchestrated my final, devastating vengeance at the grand ball, the very stage of my former humiliation. The air was thick with anticipation, a charged silence falling as I made my entrance. I did not slip in unnoticed. I walked in, my head held high, my eyes burning with the well's crimson fire, radiating an undeniable, predatory grace. The chatter died. The music faltered. All eyes, once filled with mockery, now held a mixture of fear and bewildered awe. "Remember the woman you made kneel," I declared, my voice echoing through the vast hall, each word imbued with a resonant power that silenced even the most defiant whispers. the fragile human you deemed unworthy. She is here, and she remembers everything. One by one, I exposed their secrets. Not trivial gossip, but the dark, hidden truths of Damien's coven, the ancient betrayals, the broken pacts, the loves destroyed through centuries of self-serving ambition. My heightened intuition, sharpened by my transformation and the Wells connection, allowed me to perceive the hidden anxieties, the unspoken guilt, the subtle shifts in their auras. "Lord Valerius," I intoned, my gaze fixing on a vampire who had laughed loudest at my humiliation. "Do you recall the mortal princess Isolde, whose heart you promised eternal love, only to betray her to the ancient hunters for a mere scroll of forbidden knowledge?" His pale face drained further, his mask of composure cracking. "Lady Seraphina," I continued, pointing to another who had sneered, "your pact with the shadow cult was meant to grant you dominion over the southern territories, but you sacrificed your own sister's soul to secure it, did you not?" A gasp rippled through the coven. Their carefully constructed lives, their ancient deceptions, crumbled under the weight of truth I unveiled. I spoke of ancient grudges, of stolen legacies, of forgotten pacts broken for selfish gain. I didn't need physical proof. The sheer, raw power of my revelation, backed by the undeniable truth emanating from me, was enough. Damien, stripped of his amulet, could only watch from the periphery, his face contorted in a silent scream, his eyes reflecting his shattered world. He saw his followers turn on him, their loyalty, always a fragile construct of fear and self-interest, crumbling under the weight of the truths I revealed. The coven, now fractured and distrustful, turned their bewildered and angry gazes from me to their once unquestioned leader. He, who had always wielded them like puppets, was now exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. Then, slowly, agonizingly, he began to kneel. Not by my direct command, not by physical force, but by the sheer, overwhelming power of my presence, by the weight of his own crumbling empire, by the relentless tide of truth. "Please, Ilara, mercy," he whispered, his voice hoarse, broken, tears of blood streaming down his face as his internal torment manifested. But mercy was not my goal. Redemption, both for myself and for the balance he had disrupted, was. I made him confess his sins publicly, in the very same grand hall, before the very same coven who had witnessed my public shaming. His confessions, wrung from him by the spiritual agony of his fragmented being, detailed centuries of deceit, of manipulation, of casual cruelty. He confessed his betrayal of Isolde, his countless abuses of power, his utter disregard for any life but his own. The crowd, once his, now saw him not as their fearsome lord, but as a pitiful, grotesque creature, stripped bare of his power and his dignity. The tables had not just turned, they had been completely inverted. In that Catartico release, as his broken words filled the hall, my burning rage, which had consumed me for so long, slowly began to transform. It didn't vanish, but it transmuted into a profound sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction that resonated deep within my new, powerful being. I didn't kill him. That would have been too easy, too swift a release for his centuries of transgressions. Instead, I banished him. Not to a faraway land, but to the shadows, to a solitary existence where he would forever be haunted by his deeds, by the echoes of his own conscience, by the raw, unadorned self he had spent millennia hiding. He would wander the forgotten byways of the night, powerless, shunned, forced to truly understand the suffering he had inflicted, an eternal prisoner of his own making. And then he vanished, dissolving into the swirling shadows of the crypt, a silent, final farewell to his reign. As the first, tentative rays of dawn began to paint the distant horizon, turning the bruised sky into hues of lavender and rose. I left Blackthorn Manor. I walked away from the ancient stones, the whispering echoes, the lingering scent of betrayal and triumph. I was no longer the naive librarian, no longer the vulnerable mortal, and certainly no longer a victim. I was a force of the night, a creature forged in defiance, carrying the profound lessons of that terrible night and the strength I had unearthed from my own brokenness. The Wells Pact had undeniably changed me, etching new powers and a new thirst into my very essence. But it was my journey from humiliation to strength, from despair to purpose, that had truly defined me. I wandered into the sprawling, vibrant world, no longer afraid of its shadows, for I now understood them intimately. I carried the profound wisdom of that night within me. True power comes not from dominion over others, but from within, from the resilience of the spirit, from the courage to face one's deepest pain and transmute it into unwavering purpose. It comes from owning your story, from rising from the ashes of your own destruction stronger, wiser, and more potent than you ever thought possible. My path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine, and mine alone, illuminated by the crimson glow in my eyes. If you are listening to this, if you have ever felt small, dismissed, or broken, remember my story. Remember that even in the darkest shadows, even after the most profound humiliation, you possess an inherent strength, a fire waiting to be kindled. You can rise. He made me kneel in front of everyone, but I made him beg, and now I am free, truly, eternally free.